Welcome to Good News, Bad News, the Libertarian Christian Roundtable, where every other week we challenge the status quo and give you the libertarian Christian analysis of what's happening in your world.
Welcome back to another episode of Good News, Bad News, the Christian Libertarian Roundtable presented by the Libertarian Christian Institute. Today with me, I'm Dr. Norman Horn. I am here with Carrie Baldwin and Aaron Sepulveda-Quay. I can't even say the name half the time, but he's here with us today again. And so we're just a three-person team tonight. We're missing Doug tonight since he is traveling, but we are happy to bring some interesting topics to bear for you. And we hope that if you are interested in learning more about this, we'll have some show notes with some links that you'll be able to explore more from, as well as in our in the blog post that we'll have on libertarianchristians.com. And make sure, of course, to go there, subscribe to our email list, subscribe to our YouTube feed here, like the video, spread it around, and help us out in spreading the good word about Christian libertarian ideas. So today we're just going to talk about three quick topics, and hopefully you'll learn something from each one of these. We have some kind of weird stuff today, but are also all, in Aaron's words, pretty meaty. So first up, we want to talk about something that has been a very strange topic in economic news recently, the so-called $1 trillion coin. It appears that this is something that the Treasury can do to somehow get us out of debt, or is it to just inflate the money? I don't know exactly. Aaron, you got the lowdown on this one. Please explain to me, how the heck does $1 trillion coin work?
Okay, so this is how it goes. I'm gonna try to make it as simple as possible.
We'll try.
No, because I mean, it's not really complex. It's just kind of ridiculous. So like, you really, in order to explain it, I have to hold up my laugh. So it's kind of like I have to say it seriously. So
explain it to me like I'm 5, right?
Okay. So back in the days, 1800s, when we were not alive, in that moment, grandma was not alive either. Okay, so don't even blame grandma for this. Okay.
Oh.
Back in the days, they passed a law where the Treasury Department of the federal government has the authority to create some type of collectible coins that the value of the coin, the physical value, if you wish,
and the physical value being like the value of the actual metal inside it?
The actual metal, yeah, the metal,
okay.
the metal value of the coin, and what you put on top of it, and the nominal value, the dollar value.
So the print value, then
that print value is they're going to be very different. And there was a little bit of a benefit there because the Treasury would actually profit a little bit out of it, but it was always restricted to collectors. Just as simple as that. Let's say they would create a coin for that the metal value of it was, let's say, $2, and they would put $10 on top of it. They would sell it to a collector. A collector would actually buy it for, say, $10, sometimes even less than $10. But the point is, and collectors were happy with that because for them, it's not really the nominal value because they're not going to use it as. Now, this is key. They were not going to use it as money. They were not going to be buying stuff with it. It's just a collectible. That's it. There's nothing. That's why they even pay. They pay more, so on and so forth.
So it might pay like essentially a numismatic premium on it.
There you go. That's the point. That it has some type of. It is really the spirit of the idea of the law was some type of collectible function, not a revenue fund. Since now, and this is where it gets tricky. If you notice, it does has some type of revenue function for the Treasury, but because they're quite literally profiting out of the
printing of the coin,
printing of the coin that is worth less than what it says on than the print value. But it was never a big deal.
It never really affected the money supply per se.
It was very minimal. Now, if you expand it to modern times, that quite literally means that if we continue to do that, we don't even know if the Treasury still does something like that, some type of a function of continue to doing that, because right now it really doesn't matter because the Fed is the one that creates what you and I call the base money supply, the most basic money that is created. Okay, now they're saying someone kind of figured out, why can't we just use that law from the 1800s when not even grandma was alive? And instead of printing $10 on a $2 coin, why don't we print $1 trillion in a titanium? If I'm correct, that's the metal that we're going to use.
I heard it was platinum, but still.
Yeah, there you go. Platinum, something like I'm not even sure which one. It's so ridiculous that it's hard to even keep up with, all the different, and they even give you, this is how ridiculous it got. Someone actually thought we could actually print $10 trillion in one coin, but let's just
make it one.
You see why it's difficult to explain it? Because you really want to laugh because it's just so silly, right? But why don't we just make 10 coins of 1 trillion, and that will be better? Why would it be better? I don't know.
Why don't we just, what's our debt? Why don't we just print a whatever our debt is coin and pay it off?
Oh, there you go. That's think about it. If they're talking about 10 trillion, they're already talking about almost half of the national debt. So it is somewhat, believe it or not, is somewhat related. So as the point is, the people that are coming up with this idea will be what you and I will call some type of MMTers, thinkers, to say that, look, the government creates the money. It's just, for them, it's just silly that the treasury has any limits on how much it can spend, on how much money it should create. And so, for example, you and I discuss about how the Fed and the federal government and the Fed and the treasury interact with each other so that the treasury can do its spending and the Fed can create money so that banks can create what we will call inside money, which will be banking money, what you and I use as debit card. Okay. But for them, it's like, well, okay, if the government creates money, why don't we just talk about it if it was just one government so they can create it? Because we have a law and a tradition of having a debt limit on the treasury. We don't have limits on the Fed.
See, I think this is where the kind of the confusion sort of sets in, is that it feels, I'm sure for many people, that, well, isn't this just the Fed doing something that it would have normally been doing just by adding a zero at the end of their ledger line or whatever? But it's not. It's actually something that the Treasury has a power to do that kind of circumvents the money creation ability of the Fed. But then it wasn't really intended for this purpose in the first place. And now that they're kind of looking at it to try and just print money out of thin air, it suddenly is risen in national consciousness in a certain manner. Is this going to add to the inflation problem?
Oh, there you go. Okay, there you go. The inflation we're talking about. Yeah, I thought you were going to say to the national debt, because that's the tricky part. It does not add to the national debt. And I was trying to make the case that it was, but most people are saying, no. This is some type of money creation. And then we're having a debate whether it adds or not to the national debt. No, it looks like it won't. I think it does, but it's super technical, so don't worry about it. No, it's just so silly. Like, it's just, because for me, on Austrian liquidity theory, that's a commitment of the treasury that they're not going to waste it away creating a bunch of inflation. So it's
wonderful.
They're supposed to, like, the whole point is I'm creating money, but I'm not going to waste it away. That's I mean, think about it. What does the Fed do? We're creating new money, and we're probably not going to put it on hand, but we all understand, like, we're going to create this money and we're not going to let it devalue more than 2% or so. That's what most central banks, either, even if they don't have it strict, it is kind of well known how much they should actually aim, what inflation rate they should aim. So there's a type of commitment. But the other ones are saying, no, that's just directly money, it really doesn't affect the national debt, so on and so forth. But long story short, the point is that gives the Treasury Department, and therefore Congress, to cover absolutely every conceivable program that Congress can come up with. It. Every conceivable program would just have a titanium.
Just mint a coin to pay for it's a budget.
That's literally what it is. It's just it just minted, and that's it. I mean, you just put it in there and there's $1 trillion and that's it. There's nothing to it. So because the point is that Treasury right now cannot create what you and I would call money, but this would allow the Treasury, not the Fed, and that's the big fight inside of the government. That if it should be the Fed, the only one that creates something what you and I will call money. Now, this would allow the Treasury to also create money, and that's the inside fight. From outside, it looks ridiculous, but there's a big political fight inside. Is which agency or portion of the government should be the one in charge of creating money.
I think I should be allowed to create money.
We all should. We all should.
Well, so I'm going to take a little bit of moderator's prerogative for just a second here too, and say, we brought up this the concept of how is this affecting inflation. And I do think it's interesting to note that, suddenly over the last week and a half, we have seen a recent upsurge in news and reviews of inflationary data, suggesting that the so-called temporary inflation that we were experiencing recently is shockingly going to be a little bit more, quote, sticky.
Oh, great.
Who could have predicted that?
Couldn't have predicted that. Not at all.
But now, while it might be true that there is some level of the increased pricing that is in fact due more to increased demand and lowered supply by virtue of supply chain disruption and whatnot, I think it's no surprise at all that the real inflation, which is always due to monetary supply and not merely part of price changes due to supply and demand, is indeed going to be sticky, because that's what happens. So when you are creating money out of thin air, like is being done, it's interesting to note that I think to kind of see that. I mean, clearly they have to have some knowledge that that's what they're doing, because they're at least.
Oh, no, they don't.
You don't think they have at least some measure of knowledge? Like,
No, it will be anti-knowledge if you want to see it that way. They say no, it's not. The money supply cannot push up prices.
Huh. Well, that's
I heard them say that.
How they
exactly.
So when do we get to wake up from this nightmare?
I
mean,
Bitcoin takes over.
The way that I would like to summarize it, and this is something that completely shocked me, was a lot of the people that would be considered MMT proponents, they were saying, no, look, the government can continue to spend on whatever seems necessary. And we were like, hey, wait a minute, without a limit or what? No, the limit is inflation. Because they were saying, if you create a lot of money and prices don't rise, that means that there's a lot of extra capacity in the economy. So just keep on printing until prices are around 2%. And that's it. That is our constraint, right? That kind of makes sense. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that kind of makes it.
I mean, but doesn't that kind of belie, though, that they understand what they're doing?
Wait. No, it's just getting interesting.
Oh, no. Talk on it.
It's just getting interesting because it just happened 2 days ago or something.
This week on Silly Things Explained by Aaron.
I know. That was like,
should be an SNL skit.
Yeah.
This is so it's
funnier than their normal.
The money supply does not create prices to right, consumer price to right, because first it has to be spent. If it doesn't get spent, it's not gonna do anything. And if there's an increased supply, then it's not gonna let the prices rise, because with the extra money and extra spending, there's gonna be extra goods, and kind of like that, the idea. So as long as it matches, that's the constraint. The constraint is inflation. If you have inflation, then that means that the supply is not catching up. Correct? I mean, that sounds kind of reasonable. At least they're open, as you said.
Yeah, the price level. So if there's, I understand. So yeah, if there's an increase in capacity, then prices will not rise.
Which means,
but it also means that consumption has to go up.
Which means that now that we're under inflation, guess what? As far as I understand, we hit the constraint. Correct?
We'd have to. Yeah, I mean, by that logic, yes.
By that logic, okay. Therefore, why are we thinking of $1 trillion coins?
Yeah, it's all related.
In the middle of inflation. We're like, wait, we already hit the constraint. We have to be done. We have to pull back. We have to reduce dollar supply and the national debt supply that I was trying to explain to some people, that the national debt itself sometimes is used, many times is used as money itself. So even that one pushes up prices. So we have to keep track of that. It's not just what you and I call dollars, but even the national debt, since it's used for payments, it pushes up prices many times. Now, okay, we're done. We have to reduce the national debt and the amount of dollars in circulation because prices are going up. Guess what? We don't have to.
Oh, it's so if we just stop, it'll go down again.
No. Because now this is very clever. Because now all we have to do is to spend money, but strategically on things that increase productivity. And that's it.
Well, and we have a productivity problem right now too.
Is there any constraint in reality?
Oh my gosh.
All it sounds to me like is they're making up the rules as they pretend that the rules don't.
If you accept that
exist.
every time it goes up like crazy, let's say in Argentina, 50% inflation, right? Or Venezuela is kind of crazy, but Argentina, 50% a year. They're saying, no. It's not that you're spending too much or that there's too much money in circulation relative to the supply. Is that you're not spending it strategically on things that increase productivity. So continue to spend. Can you please just be careful on what you spend? That's it. There's no constraints.
This sounds, but that's like business cycle theory 101 here. I mean, overinvestment, malinvestment, boom, bust, boom.
And just continue to spend. Make sure someday you spend on something that will increase productivity. Hopefully.
Okay, so we have to increase productivity, but the only thing that increases productivity is the free market, and they are clamping down on the freaking market.
Okay, true. Right. But here's the problem, and I think this is probably where Aaron would go next, is that how do you determine whether spending on something is in fact increasing productivity?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay. Well, no, the answer is that's where price emergence has to come in. And if you have and if prices are getting discombobulated by the mismatch of money creation and value creation from the top, then there's no rational way to actually get to what are we investing in that's actually going to be increasing productivity. So it's a central, is this not the knowledge problem?
No, it is. Think about it. If they spend more on education, great. That means we're gonna have more people graduating out of the humanities. Great. There's more people that can read poetry, but that doesn't. I'm not against people reading poetry, but the point is that the investment was supposed to match increased productivity, so we can have more consumer goods, so that the price of consumer goods will go down. But then what we have, or it doesn't have to be that. Imagine that we have a bunch of aerospace engineers, right?
So the logic
doesn't affect consumer goods. That will affect prices in the aerospace
100%. Right? But like this is where it's like it's the pretense of knowledge. It's like, well,
yeah,
there's a sense in which I can see your logic. Yes, if we just spend on things that will increase capacity, then we'll get ourselves out of this scenario. But how do you do that? That's a pretense of knowledge, and Hayek just completely dissolved what should have been that problem.
it was something like very large and thick on ideas and very thin on details. You know what I mean?
As it always is.
It's just like these great ideas and amazing. So can you please tell me how we're gonna choose this and this? Well, we figured out, and we have to be. This is the one that I love.
We have
when
to
they want to close it, it's like, hey, that word just gets you out of all troubles. Whenever you don't know what to say,
we just need more strategery.
Be creative. Be strategic.
Creative.
Those two get you out of all trouble.
Oh my gosh.
This is the proverbial car salesman.
Yeah,
trope.
Speaking of being creative and strategic, that leads perfectly into our next segment. No, not exactly, but it does on some level. But moving on from the topic of monetary policy into foreign policy, a recent event has taken place, which was somewhat monumental to me, because it was always something I would have said, just this is the only way I will ever see this debate happen is in my dreams. And that is that our good friend Mr. Scott Horton recently debated at the Soho Forum Mr. Bill Kristol. No, not Billy Crystal the actor, but Bill Kristol, the neocon warhawk.
Yep.
Bill Kristol is, of course, known to be he was the chief of staff for Dan Quayle back in the day. He was also one of the co-founders of the Weekly Standard, the magazine. And that's, of course, historically been a massive, interventionist rag. And this debate at the Soho Forum was essentially on the resolution of that interventionism is a positive good for America here at home, and ultimately, kind of more broadly speaking, for the world at large. You can view this now. This debate happened a few weeks ago, and now it is available to be seen publicly in the recorded form on YouTube. So if you just go to YouTube or Google Horton versus Kristol, Soho Forum. You can easily watch this debate. And it's a pretty fascinating watch. I watched through the whole thing. It took me a little while. It's about an hour and a half long. So it does take a little bit of commitment. But it's quite interesting to see the kind of contrasting presentation. Of course, the debate is always, this is an Oxford style debate, and in an Oxford style debate, it's always going to have that kind of polarizing effect. And I'm a big fan of Scott Horton. I haven't said this already, but we've talked about Bill, but Scott is, of course, been the longtime host of the Anti-War podcast and I believe the publications editor of antiwar.com for some time. And he's just a tremendously educated person in history and in policy. One of the guys who I would first go to if I had a question about, some question about intervention in the Middle East in the last 60 or 70 years. He knows it all, and he's got a really good recollection and recall of just anything in that realm. It's really impressive. And so to hear him go up against Kristol is pretty significant. It was never something I would have expected to see. Overall, the debate's really interesting. I'd say the kind of my basic analysis is that Scott really took him to task on a lot of different points, almost to the point where I was like, oh man, Scott, this is an Oxford debate, man. Like, be careful. Like you have to, don't get to ad hominem yet. No, don't get there. But overall, overall though, really what he's doing is he's indicting the entirety of the neocon ideology, which is very much a kind of bait and switch kind of play that the neocons like to use, where it's, well, we love liberty, we love freedom, and so we're willing to bomb the living crap out of people in order to bring it to them. And but the arguments from Kristol seem to be ring pretty hollow, especially now that we're 20 years in, especially post this Afghanistan pullout, and realizing that there was no chance it was going to go well.
Yeah. And
we can certainly criticize the way at which it was executed in the short term, and that it was done very poorly, and that, it left a lot of people high and dry and all that. But on the level of at least that the Taliban was going to come back and, with the resurgence, they're on their own, that was going to happen no matter what, guys. And so anyway, the interesting thing to me is that at this point, so much of the neocon argument has been, in a sense, practically debunked, that it's hard to maintain, I think, that level of argument. And so the level of detail that Kristol brings to bear, even in support of his own arguments, is fairly small. Yeah. It's kind of a well, you can't play counterfactual history, and if you sort of like the way things are now, in that there's a general liberal order, and by that we mean he's trying to use that in the good sense of the word liberal here, across the world. And well, then you have to kind of credit American militarism for that on some level. And it's do I really is that a causal thing, or is it incidental?
We can listen to those arguments still be alive, which is kind of sad, but much less than before. When we were young, let's say early 2000s, this was daily.
Oh yeah, this was daily. Totally thrown in our faces on a.
Well, and I think it's interesting because I can still remember watching Bill Kristol on Fox News, and I think at that time, cable news television was still fairly new. And it was, like Aaron said, it was interface every day, but they did this weird thing where they were trying to sort of predict the future and saying, our problems X, Y, and Z are going to be solved by us doing A, B, and C. Yeah. And Kristol was on his game, at least insofar as being a persuasive talking head. But when I listened to him, and I admit I have not watched the entire debate. I watched Bill Kristol's part, and that was about it. But when I watched Bill Kristol present his side this time, it was like, holy crap, like what happened to this charismatic figure that seemed to have it all together? I mean, obviously, I don't think that interventionism is a good thing or anything like that, but he was able to deliver it, 20 years ago, and in a way that was persuasive. And to listen to him now, just like you said, it rings hollow. He doesn't have any support in his favor. I don't understand how he could even.
If I'm correct, what really happened is that you guys can actually see it, and we're probably part of that movement, is the newer generations, which will be what today, the ones that we came to, we form our political views in the early 2000s.
Mhm.
We were not neocons. That's it.
Yeah.
So those guys just got old. That's it. And nobody followed. And
Well,
I guess they didn't care for it because they already had their two favorite words. Their two favorite. They had them fully, like the military industrial complex had its two words where they had everything that they ever wanted. So I feel like they felt that they didn't have to worry about growing as an intellectual movement anymore, I think.
But isn't like the Biden administration using many of the same tactics that the Bush administration did for trying to rationalize taking away liberty in the name of our security? I feel like the Biden administration is rehashing the same tactics, but with a completely new and relevant threat.
Enemy.
Yeah.
And
so in some way, we haven't gotten away from Bill Kristol's neoconservative nonsense. It's just his little pet issue is now old and tired and obviously worn out.
Well, if you review kind of the way in which he's presenting his argument, the way I'd sort of analyze it is that he was using a lot of mitigating language in order to try and stave off the potential for certain types of rebuttals from affecting the type of point that he wanted to make. And we do this like in various ways, logically speaking. If he might for instance, multiple times he went to use the language like, you could make an argument that this was not done in an ideal fashion, or this was not optimally executed. So what is he doing there? Well, he's trying to minimize the potential for someone who to try and present some type of rebuttal to his argument by saying, well, I've kind of already answered that. And we're going to, and I'm saying, and I'm kind of pushing that aside. I'm saying, push that aside in order to, I can't remember the exact logical term that you're supposed to use for this sort of thing. Maybe Carrie can remind me here from her logic courses. But there's a, it's a minimization of potential answers, and so the hedging, if you will, of on certain points to try and maximize the value he's going to try and get out of his own particular point. The interesting way in which the way I felt like that Scott really like took him to task on was that when he really doubled down on minimizing the potential opposition, Scott had in a couple of ways, and one way in particular I felt really turned the tables on him and just put down a decimating blow. Namely, there was one point in the debate where Kristol basically tried to say, like, well, I'm not going to countenance a conversation where it sounds like we're basically minimizing the Holocaust here, and which that was not what was being done by Scott even in the prior language. But what Scott turned around on him was that he just let loose after that point, because I mean you could almost feel like. I wish I could have. I should go back and look and see if we could see like the reaction that Scott had to that sentence. And I'm not sure if they certainly didn't do a close up on Scott for that, or if they were only on Bill at the time. But I can only imagine that inwardly Scott just went like, or did you just go there? Oh man, here it comes. So then he basically says, you know what, you guys, you neocons, every time that you brought up, a new intervention, you compared whoever it was who was on your hit list to the new Hitler. You called Saddam that. You called Gaddafi that. You called. I mean, it just went. And he went through the list, and then that's because that's what happened every time that we've had these new interventions put before us. It has been in the context of like, well, you're the, this guy is this, this is Hitler-esque type activity. He even called Trump that. And, come on, really? And so what he did is he's turning the tables on Kristol right there and said, that is minimizing the Holocaust here. Mm-hmm. It's minimizing even the atrocities that you are, that America ends up participating in as a result of these interventions. And it was just like, wham, it was beautiful, because that was like, it was just, and at that point, Kristol was almost like, that was the last straw. I think like he didn't have, after that, it was like, oh my gosh, how do you come back from that? He was decimated there. Wow. And I think I thought it was a glorious, the best part of the entire debate. So that was later on. I think that was almost during the, I think that may have been even during the Q&A portion of it. But wow, I mean, it was a significant thing to watch, and it makes me want to go back and even look at some of my own recorded debates and see how much cringe I can take. But we may do that someday. We'll do that someday. Whatever.
Did Scott Horton get the Tootsie Roll?
He did get the Tootsie Roll, as I understand. Yes.
Cool. Yeah. I figured he would. But...
And just so before we conclude this segment, may we not forget, of course, that our dear Carrie here has been to the Soho Forum and participated against the one and only Walter Block, talking about abortion and evictionism. It's an excellent thing to watch. You should check it out. And that's something to kind of close on. Of course, I'm always plugging my friends, right? All right. Well, so that's the Soho Forum news. And at some point also as well, we're hopeful that LCI will be sponsoring a Soho debate, hopefully in 2022. Cross your fingers. It was supposed to happen in 2020, but we're beginning the steps toward making that happen in 2022. Cool. Here's to hoping.
Yeah.
Dadgum Delta variants and all that. No, but anyway. But to kind of conclude, we have one more thing we kind of wanted to talk about, and it's something that's been rather suddenly come upon us. We had no idea that this was on the horizon in terms of publications. But Carrie, tell us about this weird new book you've discovered.
Oh man. Well, it's appropriate that you bring up my Soho Forum debate, because the big deal with the Soho Forum debate was the concept of self-ownership and whether self-ownership can be applied to the fetus. And if so, what are the implications for that? And so here's this new book that's come out. It's from a Reformed writer. I think he's a professor. His name's Alan Noble. And it's called You Are Not Your Own. And it's
referring to 2 Corinthians.
1 Corinthians, I think.
Oh, is it first?
Yeah, 1 Corinthians 6:19 through 20.
You are not your own. You have been bought with a price, sort of.
Right.
Thing. Yeah.
And he is Reformed. He also appeals to the Heidelberg Catechism question 1, which asks, what is your only comfort in life and death? That I belong body and soul to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Or I'm paraphrasing because I don't know it by heart. But at any rate, so what he does though is this book isn't just discussing how Christians belong to Christ, which we all know, obviously we do. Scripture says it outright. But we also know that there are some people who have criticized Christian libertarians for this idea of self-ownership. And Alan Noble really has decided to attack it outright. So his thesis, I'm going to read his thesis, says this. He says, the fundamental lie of majority is that we are our own. He says, until we see this live for what it is, until we work to uproot it from our culture and replant a conception of human persons as belonging to God and not ourselves, most of our efforts in improving the world will be glorified band-aids. He goes on to state his stated goal is to recontextualize the argument in the 21st century, and to think specifically in terms of self-ownership and self-belonging, from which a number of problems stem. And so, and those number of problems he quotes outright as everything from endemic porn use to white nationalism to the alt-right and meaningless jobs and sex abuse scandals and disconnection with the natural world. Like everything can be blamed on this concept of self-ownership. And I know that he's talking specifically about the libertarian view of it because he refers to the origin of this concept is coming from 17th century classical liberalism. Strangely enough, he attributes this to Nietzsche, not Locke. So I'm not sure where he's going with that, but he's really describing self-ownership and what he believes are the implications of self-ownership as being very nihilistic, very fatalist. And so he's really this book. I mean, he probably has he does have some good criticisms about culture generally, but he's totally scapegoating the concept of self-ownership and libertarianism and individuality. And it's just really weird. So I'm actually going to be writing a review on it so that these points can be addressed. I'm a little surprised that it's receiving such praise in the Reformed world because it's very poorly written. It's not, I mean, he's got a ton of scholarly resources, like it's footnoted, but he doesn't seek out any sort of classical liberal or libertarian resources to get, definitions proper or really address this in an intellectually honest way.
So in other words, he's arguing, he's could be, I mean, it sounds like he's, for one thing, straw manning a lot.
Yeah.
Because he's not actually engaging with the literature, which means that he's mistakenly doing scholarship in the first place, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
It also sounds disturbingly like eisegetical research.
Yes.
In a way that just doesn't make sense to me. How you can get there, because it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Like, oh well, okay, so if the problem with critiques of self-ownership oftentimes is like, well, what's your alternative?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're saying that God owns. Well, then what does that mean for the way in which you and I relate together?
Right.
And that's sort of the issue from even the Christian libertarian standpoint, where we've talked about the idea of stewardship or self-stewardship as being sort of an alternative model, but it doesn't replace self-ownership. It just augments it in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
And I don't, it just puzzles me that, that somebody would find that this is because it's a natural question to ask. First of all, I would say, like, it's a natural question to ask. If the Bible says that you are not your own, you're bought with a price. Well, what does that mean about self-ownership? Okay, well, that's a natural question to ask. Yeah. But the answer that can come out of it, though, is not, well, I guess that, because God's ownership reigns supreme, that means that, the only proper manner of social organization has to then be what? Theocracy? Which has never been the answer of the church.
Yeah.
I mean, well, it's perplexing.
It is perplexing because, he's also listing out a number of complaints that he has with culture. He names a few things. One, he's very concerned that people like, stay-at-home moms get ridiculed for being stay-at-home moms. Or you have this, he brings up the incel population, the involuntary celibate population as being yeah, this is
Oh,
a
poor
problem and a
Aaron.
product
You're so
and a
innocent.
product. Yeah, it's a product of this hyper individuality. And
Okay.
you
I'm
know,
surprised because I cannot even understand how individuality and
Yeah.
that problem could be correlated.
I don't understand it. I don't understand it either, to
Now,
be
now,
honest with
now,
you.
to be fair, I mean, just talking and I wouldn't consider myself an individualist, although I'm a libertarian. What I would say is
Whoa,
stay-home
whoa.
moms or stay-home dads
Well, but
would
that's what
actually
he's
be the most individualistic because they're saying, I don't care. I have my own priorities. I don't care
right.
what anybody says.
Well, but
Like-
he's saying that a woman can't actually stay at home, be a stay-at-home mom, and live in the culture that we live in because the culture says she should be working, or he talks about urban sprawl and how suburban life has separated women from each other, and I'm just like,
Oh my gosh.
I mean, his complaints are rather over the top. To
Yes.
begin with.
Okay, there you go. Like
But-
a lot of us could agree with the complaints, but they're so over the top that they make them trivial, and that's my concern.
Yeah.
A lot of things could be like, oh, you know what? That's actually a concern. And he goes over the top, like, dude, really, you don't have to go there. Like,
Well, and on the flip side, though, so those are some of his conservative complaints, including abuse and porn use is a huge one. But then he also complains about, quote, unsustainable consumption and the usage of plastics and how, we can't actually deal with the garbage that's created from it. And and I'm just sitting here going, if he understood what self-ownership is, he could see how it, is intended to work to solve these problems. I mean, even the idea of a woman staying home and being a stay-at-home mom, that comes completely from bodily autonomy and agency. A woman making
no one's
that
business
decision.
whether you stay home or not.
Right.
Literally, no one's decision but yourself.
He's trying to say, first of all, he attributes, he does not properly define self-ownership. And he is confusing it with personhood, the metaphysical idea of personhood. He is also confusing it with personal identity. And so he blames a number of things, like he calls it, he says that it's responsible for materialism and consumerism and atomistic individualism and like all of this stuff. And, every libertarian that I know of that understands the concept of self-ownership would say, no, it's not atomistic, right? We're not materialists. We're not, just wanting to consume for the sake of consumption. Like that's not what we're talking about.
I tend to say
I don't
know, sociologically speaking, and I borrow this wording from the Spanish-speaking world that I think in English we should add it a lot more, is libertarianism is about human beings depending upon social institutions instead of the state.
Funny, that's actually like one of our core values at LCI.
Yeah. Well,
family, friendship, church, voluntary associations. That's what libertarianism is about, is don't depend upon the coercive power of the state.
Right.
Depend upon your social relationship, which is mainly going to be people that actually love you and know who you are and care about you in the most sincere way possible.
And so part of his complaint is that self-ownership has created this culture that doesn't love each other. Right.
Oh my gosh.
That's what he's going to get into. Right. The solution is to understand that we are not our own. We belong to God, and therefore we're supposed to serve our fellow man, that's not untrue, but it doesn't negate self-ownership. And even like, I want to be able to say, look, you want to complain about things like sexual assault and sex scandals in the church, but you can't if a woman doesn't have self-ownership. If she doesn't have a right to her body, if she doesn't own her body, you can't make a complaint about rape and sexual violence against her.
Well, you end up having to make a purely like subjective argument. Well, they can make the argument, but it's just going to be on some sort of de facto basis because, well, rape is wrong because God said it was wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that's, there's sort of like there's kind of a way, the idea of natural rights, the idea of natural morality is one that we understand to be true. And even those in the scholastics who kind of came up with this even said this is like that they would be true even if God did not exist. And they're not
Right.
trying to go toward the atheist side there, but they're suggesting that like these are evident principles.
Mhm.
And so, by the way, like the idea of self-ownership may have consummated in Locke, but it was definitely present before then. So if he doesn't realize that, then,
give me a second. Wouldn't be that things that are true through natural revelation outside of scriptural revelation. I'm trying to remember what it is.
So that this was the contention of the scholastics since like it's got to go back at least to the 15th century, if not the 14th. And I may have my dates slightly incorrect there. But like this
1600s Spain.
Well, yeah. I mean, surely that's where you get some of the lit, but I mean, like it goes back before that. And then when you start even looking into the church fathers, there's this definite sense of a growing sense of individual responsibility and individual value that comes out of even the early church fathers that you don't find anywhere else. Like, I mean, you can kind of get it out of the Stoics, but like, and so even that, there's a growing kind of sense of self that's happening in, throughout all the world on some level, with the rise of certain philosophy and whatnot. And I mean, that's tracking back to ancient history and antiquity and whatnot. But like this, there's no way you can just like say, well, we just, self-ownership just sort of sprung into being with Locke in the 17th century, or Nietzsche in the 17th century, apparently. I'm not sure how that worked its way out, but that's just it's such a confusion of category.
The natural system of liberty comes at least from natural system of liberty that even Adam Smith talked about. We can go back to at least in the Protestant line. We can easily go back to Grotius. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Sure. Yeah.
And to Pufendorf, at least.
And that's just in Reformation period, of course.
Exactly.
I understand. Yeah, I mean, I get that, but it goes back even farther. When you think about it, there's this you'll see the growing sense of these things in writings of antiquity for sure. I mean, just as for example, and I'm going on tangents here, but like even in Stoic literature, there is a sense of the power of oneself to control oneself, because that's all you ultimately have power over.
Right.
And that's, there is a growing sense, even in those writings from Epicurus, Epictetus and Epicurus for that matter, through Marcus Aurelius, who was, he's a freaking emperor of Rome, to Seneca. I mean, forgive me, I've been reading a lot of Stoicism in the last couple of years, so it's like I actually kind of know this stuff now. But these are. It's not something that you uniquely, resonant to the 17th century and beyond that just sort of appeared.
Yeah. So it's what's weird is that, first of all, it appears that this author, Alan Noble, really does have an axe to grind. But the weird thing is that, part of the message of his book is that he wants us to understand our relationship to the community again, and caring about other people. And I'm just sort of floored, because one of the basic principles that I learned in my philosophy classes was that when you are criticizing or critiquing rather a point of view that you don't hold, the rule of thumb is to paint them in the best light possible, to do your utmost to paint them in the best light possible, if for nothing else than to improve your own argument, to make sure you're producing the best argument. And he doesn't do that. He doesn't even make an attempt. Like there are literally no resources that he cites that are, classical liberal or even modern libertarian saying this is what self-ownership means. This is what they intended to imply.
They have no direct interaction with those that he's critiquing. And that's very concerning.
Absolutely zero. Absolutely zero interaction.
And I think for Christians in general should actually be critical of all literature, including Christian literature, that does not interact with those that are being criticized. It's very unfair to have an entire book, an entire post, whatever you want to call it, without an honest and open and critical. That's fine. With those that are actually being criticized.
Yeah. Well, if he cared about his own message, he should be doing that.
I'm actually more concerned about the audience, because the audience is accepting
the audience. Yeah, I'm concerned about the audience as well. Yeah, I'm concerned about the audience as well, because especially because this is, targeted at Reformed people. And I mean, for me personally, I've been trying to reach out to the Reformed world about libertarianism, and I've had some success. But this is published by InterVarsity Press, so he gets way more airtime than I do. And people are just, I'm surprised at how many people have written positive reviews of it. And I'm just like, he's not actually engaging with the topic. He's inventing this concept out of thin air and then knocking it down. So at any rate, that's the book that I came across, and I will be writing a review of it and critiquing it. And so,
and I have a couple of other sort of concluding comments / questions for you. For one thing, who all is praising this book at this point? Can you point to a few names that people might know? Because I'm just curious as to who else should I be avoiding? No, I'm just kidding. But
it sounds like a lot of people I know would actually like these ideas, because they're obviously very concerned. Because this is the issue, and as libertarians, we have to kind of figure that out. That the idea, politics and culture are sadly very connected in people's mindset category.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Even some libertarians inside, I would say, except for not for Christian libertarians. So if you think about political conservatism, then that means cultural conservatism, which I've seen it to not be the case.
Right.
The other way, liberal politics will mean liberal culture, and I've seen it not be the case. And for libertarianism, they're always assuming, okay, if you're a libertarian politically, therefore you must be some type of libertine that doesn't care about anything,
right?
Because otherwise you will be inconsistent with whatever, because everything has to be connected. And no, that's not the case.
It's almost like we wrote a book chapter on that.
I know, we did. Anyways, to answer your question, Norm, I think the one off the top of my head, actually the one that sort of sent alarm bells into my head, was that Mike Horton at the White Horse.
Really?
Inn. Yeah. And I think, I mean, if I have just totally honest, I think probably he wrote it just as a nice thing, and he doesn't engage with libertarianism either. So I wouldn't expect him to really know. But at any rate, there was another author that I follow, Amy Bird. She is currently reading it. She said she was excited about it. And so,
what concern about them? We should actually reach out to them. If you
especially you have a connection to her, don't you?
Amy? I do. I think we've agreed that we take different approaches to our common problem, but at any rate,
okay. So one thing that comes to mind to me about this is I'm reminded what Dick Clark, who is one of our other co-authors on Faith Seeking Freedom, and by the way, that chapter reference, we did write a chapter about misconceptions about libertarianism from the Christian point of view. And we addressed this idea: are libertarians just libertines? And of course, the answer that is no.
You know why it bothers me the most? Because I've seen a bunch of conservatives. They openly tell you, I'm conservative when it comes to like physical whatevers, but in social issues, I'm totally like on the other side. And nobody says anything. Oh, but when we say something, then we are the worst or whatever you want to say.
Yeah. So like, congratulations, guys. So here's the thing. Dick noted that this sounds, and I'm almost quoting here. It's like, this sounds like it's going to be a huge exercise in equivocation. And he was right.
Yes.
So the fact is that like, this happens all the time with respect to concepts in libertarian ideas, because it is in the interest of the state to essentially disparage ideas about liberty through ambiguity. Okay. So the more that they can confuse people about what it means to be free, you guys are all free right now. I mean, you're free, but we're also going to take 40% of your income, because that's how we maintain that freedom for you, buddy, and things like that. So these are acts of confusion that they sow with us all the time. And so, and by that, I mean, like, this is an act of equivocation. Is essentially that they're trying to confuse through ambiguity that what meaning really is in a certain time, a situation. So I see that as being this is, and we also, even as libertarians, we are not immune to doing this ourselves at times. That is why it is crucial to understand how to make a good argument and present it well, and in a respectful but also poignant way. I mean, all these things about rhetoric matter here for us. And so I think, in as much as this is ridiculous, drivel from Mr. Noble, and very ignoble of him to write it in the first place, we should also use it as an object lesson for ourselves to, like, you know what? Let's get better at our own arguments as well while we're at it, because we need to.
Yeah.
Because the better we get at this, then the less confusion that they can bring against us. So that's my final word of words of wisdom from Norman for the day. And,
another SNL skit.
Yeah. It'd be funnier than last week's, I'm sure, or whatever it was. I heard they had some Kim Kardashian hosted, which is just whatever. Anyway,
I haven't watched it.
I can't believe I'm going to end an episode of this by saying the word Kim Kardashian, but it just happened.
Congratulations.
So until next time.
No. Let's close it this way. Socialism doesn't work because it has a knowledge problem.
There you
go. Calculation problem.
Yeah.
There you go.
And don't do eisegesis, please, for the love of God. Don't. Please stop.
Just stop.
That's a good way to end. Bye, guys.
Bye.